Are you searching for answers? Discover your true identity. Stay tuned to Shalom World.
I remember saying to my mum one time that I wanted to be a priest, not really knowing what that meant And that was a kind of vocational call that never really left me from my childhood. Something deep down my heart, deep down my soul that convinced me that the Lord wanted something more from me. And that's when the idea of becoming a priest became more vivid. All I want is to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. And this is the kernel of my priesthood, to touch into Christ and to experience the tremendous power of his resurrection. So I was born in what I'd say is a pretty typical Catholic family. One of three boys. I've got an older brother and a younger brother. And I was very fortunate to be sent to some tremendous Catholic schools. Faith was certainly a part of our upbringing and prayer a part of my childhood. My beautiful parents just celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. I recall going to Mass every Sunday, something that I really look forward to. I always enjoyed going to Mass. And as I got older, I got more and more involved in the life of my parish. I remember as a young boy when I started to altar serve. And altar serving was a tremendous grace that came my way. I remember helping Father vest for Mass and lighting the coals for the thurible, and that proximity to the priest in serving the Mass and that proximity to the altar drew me closer and closer spiritually to the idea of maybe the Lord is calling me to be a priest. And that was a kind of kernel that never left me in terms of the very subtle but prolonged call to be a priest, that vocational call that never really left me from my childhood. And the more I thought about it, the stronger it got, and the more I prayed about it, the clearer it became. When I finished my university studies, I got my first job. I was a public servant, and I thought that in my role as a public servant, however little it was, I was contributing to the greater good. I was a small little gesture to the greater good, and my little role in the public service was contributing to something bigger than me. But despite that, there was a sense of restlessness, in the sense that deep down, I didn't think this is what I would do with my life. The Lord's calling me to something else. And at the end of the year, the year of discernment which I took, it kind of came to a head whereby I kind of had to make a call. In a sense, there was a certain little leap of faith that I couldn't perpetually discern. I kind of had to take a purposeful step. In many senses, I thought, this vocation to become a priest was somewhat like an itch, I thought, and that I had to scratch it by going to the seminary and realising I wasn't meant to be a priest. I wasn't called to be a priest, but then I would be satisfied that I gave it a go. With my job, with my career, I really enjoyed what I did, and I enjoyed the challenge of it. I enjoyed the intellectual stimulus that the job provided. I enjoyed working with my colleagues at the Treasury and making my little contribution to the greater good. And I enjoyed the money of course, that came with it, and the lifestyle that came with my work and being a professional. But deep down, there wasn't that great sense of satisfaction. I couldn't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. I thought that there's something deep down inside of me, that deep down in my heart, deep down in my soul, that convinced me that the Lord wanted something more from me. Not something better necessarily, but just something more for me. And that's when the idea of becoming a priest became more and more vivid. So there was almost like a little internal dialogue going on inside my heart between my role, my job, and all that entailed, and the deep call to become a priest that started as an infant, as a child. And at the same time too, you know, I was in a great relationship and with this beautiful girl, and that brought me a lot of joy as well. And the more I prayed about the priesthood, the more I discerned the priesthood, the more I sought advice from those who are really wanting the best of me, the idea of becoming a priest became clearer. I felt a great sense of comfort with that idea, and a great sense of peace, really. And peace was the overwhelming, and it's that real deep inner peace that led me to discern the priesthood more and to enter the seminary. So I remember the day I entered the seminary. It was the 4th of February 2012, and there was a number of us on the first day. I enjoyed the academic challenge of the study at the seminary and the prayer life, but it took a while to adjust, because I was used to the 9 to 5, the working life, and then the timetable of the seminary was very different. The rhythm of the daily mass and daily prayer with my brother seminarians. One of the challenges, though, was, of course, the community living. At one point, there was almost 30 men in residence, and different ages, different experiences, different background. And as you can imagine, at times, that can add to a bit of friction within the community, and to brush off some of the rough edges of all of us. But deep down, it was the start of some lifelong friendships and some beautiful priestly friendships now. And after that 7 years, which is indeed a long time, there was always that great anticipation of one day maybe I'll be a priest. I came to a deep realisation that I'm not called to the seminary, rather I'm called to serve the people of the diocese. And so this, in a sense, was a transitionary moment to a moment of lifelong learning, a moment of constantly discerning and forming myself closer and closer to the heart of Christ, who is indeed the Good Shepherd. And I have to say, looking back over my 7 years of seminary formation, it was really, deep down, it was a happy time. It was a joyful time. Of course, I was ordained a deacon with my classmate at the seminary chapel. And then there was that great anticipation and longing for the priestly ordination, which happened about 9 months or so after. And I recall with great enthusiasm finding out the date, the 29th of June, which is, of course, the feast of Peter and Paul. And there's a great tradition in this diocese, indeed the province of which I'm in, of many priests being ordained on the feast day of St. Peter and St. Paul. And I remember lying down on the cold marble of the cathedral and thinking how blessed I'd been to be here, how fortunate I am, how graced I've been to come to this moment of ordination. And so that was a great memory. Following my priestly ordination, I received my first appointment. And I was appointed to quite a diverse parish, indeed quite a large parish geographically. And so that presents many opportunities for pastoral ministry from the very young to the elderly and everything in between, hospitals and the schools. One thing I particularly enjoy about my ministry, indeed I remember quite vividly, is my first baptism, preparing the family for their first child to be baptised. And I remember after some of the introductory rites of the baptism, I went down to this little child who must have been about 2 or so years old, and I said, "The Christian community welcomes you with great joy." And at that moment, he turned and ran to his mother. So these are some of the beautiful joys of my early ministry since my ordination. Another thing I quite enjoy is my ministry to the schools. Indeed, before I was a priest, I was a school teacher. So working with the teachers, going into the schools, meeting with the young people has indeed been very enriching. One initiative one of the secondary schools in the parish has is what they call the school to schoolies, where they ride from the parish over 100 kilometres and they ask people to sponsor them. The money goes to a local hospice, those who are indeed palliative, and also it goes to St Vincent de Paul. And so I've been training with these young men, helping with the fundraising for this initiative. Over 100 kilometres with them. And so it's been a real sense of companionship and a sense of outreach and mission. And what's been enjoyable is that it's broken many stereotypes about indeed what a priest is and what a priest does. And also too, it's been quite enjoyable where I can speak to these young men on a level that's quite different than, say, in a classroom or in a setting that's more confined. Part of my ministry here in this parish is a ministry to the sick and indeed the dying. We have a number of hospitals in the parish. It was just so powerful to be a conduit of God's grace, of God's mercy, of God's healing in that instance. It was really quite beautiful. And to see the effect it had on him and indeed his friends who were gathered around, it was quite edifying for my own faith and my own belief in God's presence and healing. Also too, in my ministry, because we have such a beautiful church in the parish, there are many couples that like to get married here. One area of my ministry that I find quite challenging is that of funerals. Indeed, there's been many funerals that I've celebrated even in this short time of my priesthood. And everyone's has its particularities, so intimately involved in the great gift, and thanks to God for this life, although it being very short, was an amazing grace in my very short ministry. In my early years of my priesthood, to have that support of an experienced pastor, to be guided in acute pastoral situations, be that ministering to the sick, the catechesis of the young, preparing couples for their holy marriage, being more and more comfortable with the celebration of the sacraments, to be able to run these things and by an experienced pastor and some great pastoral staff has been something I found very rewarding. Also to take my instances to prayer, spiritual direction, where I can have a keener sense of what it is the Lord's doing with and for me in my priestly ministry, and in a sense to be guided by His Holy Spirit, to be more and more attuned to His will in my life, to be more and more graced by recognising Him in those who I'm sent to serve. The high point of my ministry, of course, is the celebration of the Mass, the celebration of the Eucharist, the preparation for the celebration of the Mass, to be prepared, and the great privilege it is to be a priest and to celebrate the Mass. I remember the first time, of course, was celebrating the Mass, singing alongside the Archbishop at my ordination, and then every celebration since is something that's I've never taken for granted. And it's been a beautiful privilege to celebrate the Mass with and for the people. Hundreds to thousands in the congregation, to just a weekday Mass where there's maybe 2 or 3. The great beauty of the Mass and saying the words of Christ himself, take and eat, this is my body, take and drink, this is my blood, means that I'm more and more aware that the ministry isn't indeed about myself, but rather it's about Jesus Christ. I'm still finding my feet in the ministry in many ways. One thing about the seminary, though, is it's very structured. Set times for prayer, set times for meditation, spiritual reading, of course, set times for Mass each day and classes. And so there's many structures in place to help you discern your vocation. And following my ordination, of course, I was appointed to a parish, and a lot of those structures kind of fell away just naturally. So really I had to take a sense of ownership for my prayer life, the priorities I place on prayer and other aspects of my ministry, given the variable nature. Phone call here, an email there can change my day quite quickly. So more and more I've tried to find a rhythm in my own prayer life that's conducive to listening to God's word in my life, to hearing his call and to being directed by him, and at the same time to be available and to be a minister of God's sacraments to the people of the parish. Sometimes there's a great harmony in those two things and they work beautifully together, hand in hand. Sometimes there's certain elements that push and pull, maybe more towards the pastoral work or more towards prayer. As I've gotten into the rhythm of praying the office by myself, setting aside time each day to read the scriptures, to work on things like my preaching, and in a sense to be more authentic in practicing what I preach myself. And I found that time quite challenging, actually, being from a lively seminary community with many brothers close at hand, to being by myself, to prepare my own meals and doing my own shopping, etc. And more, some of the temptations that I faced became more and more evident in my life. And it was in these few months where I didn't really realise how much I relied on God's grace and my prayer life. And some of these things were kind of put to the side, and I found myself really empty. And I found myself more and more drawn to behaviours and temptations that otherwise weren't present ordinarily. And this is something that I really had to talk to my spiritual director about to get some sense of guidance, and also to be more faithful to my ministry, to the celebration of the sacraments, to my daily Mass, and really to prioritise the Lord more and more along my ministry, where you feel very hypocritical. You feel like a bit of a hypocrite when you're not as authentic in practicing what it is you preach. And also too, I've been more and more aware of the graces that flow from the sacrament of penance, the sacrament of reconciliation, and frequenting that more and more regularly, and having a great and patient and kind confessor who helps me in my own sinfulness. And receiving the graces from the sacrament of penance has been something that I've relied upon more and more. And it's also helped me be a better confessor when it is people come to me with their own struggles and their worries and they want to be forgiven by Christ himself in the sacrament of penance. And so it's helped me become a better confessor, God willing, and a better listener, and in a sense a more authentic conduit of God's grace and God's mercy. On my ordination card I have a beautiful image of St. Thomas, of course, who's my patron saint, and that of Christ. And it's the beautiful episode in the Gospel where Thomas puts his hand into Christ's wounds. And so that's the image on my ordination card, and I guess it speaks to me in many senses because I understand my own woundedness, my own sinfulness. On the back I have a little quote from St. Paul to the Philippians, chapter 3, verse 10, and all I want is to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. And this is the kernel of my priesthood, to touch into Christ and to experience the great and tremendous power of his resurrection, the great hope of the resurrection and the great inspiration that it gives me to know that touching Christ and Christ touching me, that the good news manifests itself in my ministry. God, my life. Indeed, there's been many surprises, but there hasn't been any disappointments. It's been a life that's been one that's been full of many blessings.
A lot of talk in our church today about the new evangelisation, and we might ask, well, what's new about the new evangelisation? One thing that's new is that we're trying to renew the faith in people who should already be Catholic, should already be Christian. Individuals, families, communities, whole cultures that need to rediscover the gospel. And so what's new is that they're getting a new shot in the arm of faith, of evangelisation. Another thing that's new about it is the way that we do that, and the new media and groups like Shalom World TV are very important for bringing the gospel anew to our cultures, to our families, to each of us individually. And so I encourage all the viewers of Shalom World TV, and I encourage Shalom World TV themselves to keep up the good work, to keep watching this channel and to keep up the good work of presenting the Catholic faith to our world today.